Hey, everybody, this is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club Live. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, please make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. That really helps. And for those of you who are listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, if you wouldn't mind dropping a rating and a review in, that really helps as well. But we're mostly just really glad that you're listening. So thank you for that. Today's episode is brought to you by Next Placement. Next Placement is Career Club's newest offering for companies who are needing to transition employees. It's sort of our answer to outplacement, where we're bringing a more people-centric, empathetic approach to help with the mental wellness, emotional intelligence, and community that job seekers need. So please check out Next Placement at career.club. Today's guest, I am really excited to have. I've wanted to have him on for quite a while. This is David Weiser. David is the managing director of Weiser Partners, a firm that he started in 1995, doing executive search, specializing in sales, marketing, and insights professionals at the C-suite level typically. David, if you're listening to this and you're consumer packaged goods, marketing, sales, you're probably already familiar with this firm and you're probably on his email list because he is, in my view, the de facto standard for excellence in executive search. And just really, really pleased to have David come on and share his expertise with us. So with that, David, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Bob. It's good to be here. And by the way, it's not that I was playing hard to get, because when you say jump, I will say how high. So I love what you're building here and happy to be a guest on your show.
No, well, and in all seriousness, David, I'm really, really pleased to have you on. I genuinely meant what I said. I think you are the gold standard, particularly in the functional areas. Do you mind maybe just very quickly explaining to people sort of the niche that Weiser Partners has and why you founded the firm?
Sure. I founded the firm largely because, having been on the other end of recruiter calls and being a little bit underwhelmed and disappointed, I thought there was a better mousetrap. Some of the things I thought were missing, talking to a recruiter who really didn't have the functional background for the role they're recruiting, it was really hard for them to understand answers to questions if they were even asking me functional questions.
Yeah.
And then when I would ask questions about the role in the company, I could hear the paper scrambling, and it just didn't feel like a really good relationship. So the whole premise was, let's be, agents, let's be advisors. Let's have a functional background in areas we recruit so that we can advise clients in a different way and so that we can really interview and understand somebody's capabilities. So like you said, we started off in marketing, kind of expanded to sales, further expanded into research, insights, data science. Right now, marketing is still 40 to 50% of what we do.
Yep.
We also have a separate C-level practice, Bob, all mid-market private equity-owned companies where we'll recruit CEOs and CFOs.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And again, having been, on your mailing list and familiar with your work for, a number of years now, very high quality roles. And it's no surprise to me that people are entrusting to you guys, the partnership to go help them find the right talent. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, want to just do kind of our customary icebreakers. So where were you born and raised, David?
I grew up in Minneapolis, born in 1965, and enjoyed living in the Twin Cities, and then went off to Dartmouth College in 1983, earned a degree in English, minor in sociology, played baseball there, and then graduated in 87, moved to Cincinnati because, of course, as a child, I was dreaming about marketing mouthwash and toothpaste. So I had a hard time explaining that to my dad. He said, wait a minute, we spent how much to send you to Dartmouth so you could sell toothpaste?
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, Procter & Gamble's not a bad place to find yourself.
Great place.
And so you answered a couple questions. So we did university and how you found your way to beautiful Cincinnati, Ohio. Just a little bit about your family.
Sure. I've been married 32 years. My wife is Elizabeth, and she's a media consultant. She still works full time. We've got 3 kids. 29, 27, 24. Our oldest daughter has been married a couple of years. She's got a newborn.
Well, congratulations. That's fun. Grandpa-ness is awesome.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it.
I know you mentioned that to me. I'm still kind of getting used to the concept, but but they're doing great. She works for Gulfstream Aerospace
Hmm.
in research and analytics. Daughter Emily lives in San Francisco. She works for a private wealth management firm. And then our son, Sam, works for a fintech startup with a couple of ex-Goldman Sachs partners.
Very cool. That's awesome. And then you kind of alluded to it, but so if you don't mind just kind of very briefly kind of paint a little bit of your career history, because you said you started at Procter, and just if you don't mind
Yes,
explaining that for a sec.
sure. So I was at P&G 5.5 years, worked on brands like Scope, Crest toothpaste, some of the Vicks cough cold products, Chloraseptic. That was part of the Richardson Vicks acquisition in
Yes.
'85. Left P&G, loved the experience, forever grateful for the training and the connections, but just felt like maybe the service side was where I belonged. So I joined a company in Cincinnati called On Target Media,
Mm-hmm.
which was started by a great guy named Mike Collette. Um, that has since evolved into a really big company called Patient Point. I was there a couple of years, and then one day I told my wife, "Hey, I think the world needs another executive search firm," and I started in I guess it was late '94, early '95, and I've been doing that ever since.
Wow. Well, congratulations. As someone who has also started something, it's not easy. And I can't imagine doing it with little kids and, needing to be in peak earning years. So good for you. And then very quickly, you mentioned baseball, but what do we find you doing when you're not at work? What do you like to do?
We live on a lake here in South Carolina. I wish we were out on the lake more often, but we're working really full time. But we'll get out on the lake on the weekends. We're going to spend as much time as we can with our new grandson and our daughter and our son-in-law.
Yeah.
We don't do a lot of travel, but we keep busy. Fish. Like to watch a NASCAR race. Like to watch baseball. I don't do a lot of reading. I kind of feel like I'm read out. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
we're plenty busy. Try to stay fit. Not always successful, but
Oh, come on, come
carve
on.
out time for that.
You look fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
So the reason, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, obviously, Career Club is helping people. We're using sales and marketing principles to help people find a career that matters to them. And in CPG or retail language, I would talk about, well, you need to take an omni-channel approach to this. There's not one right way to go get a job. It could be online applying, although I think we all know that that has some limited utility. There's networking, which everyone would advocate. There's executive search. There's direct outreach to companies. There's a myriad of ways to go find your next opportunity. But clearly, executive search is one of them. And do you mind maybe kind of explaining the two flavors of executive search if you think about retained and contingent?
Sure.
And then I want to unpack a little bit, how candidates can best work with executive search firms. But just to start it off, do you mind kind of just explaining the models that executive
Sure.
search typically takes?
Sure. By the way, you made a great point in your setup here, and maybe we'll come back to this. I think this is kind of like, playing bingo. When you go to a bingo parlor, you don't buy one card, you buy 20.
Right.
Because you just don't know which one is going to hit. And you raised a great point. You've got to pursue opportunities through multiple channels. You never know how it's going to happen, but we'll probably talk about that
For sure.
a little bit. So yeah, there's actually three different types of search firms. Contingency, where the firm is paid only if they make a placement.
Mm-hmm.
Full retained, which is what we do. We are the exclusive only partner working on that search, and we work it until it's done. And the client commits a fee up front, and we commit to finding the right hire. There is a third hybrid version called contained, which is really it's a blend of those two. And I understand what gave rise to that. I think it's a difficult model to execute. Because the tendency might be for a client to say, look, we'd really rather do this on contingency. So I don't know exactly how well those are working, but there's a fair number of firms out there who will do both.
If we look at sort of the two typical ones, because what I want to help listeners understand is sort of what's the motivation, what is the work style for if you're dealing with a contingency firm versus if you're dealing with a retained search firm.
Right. I think there's definitely a place for contingency, and I think they're pretty effective at lower levels, entry level up through maybe the first 5, 6, 7 years of somebody's career, up through a manager level,
Yep.
plan manager if we're talking about CPG. The limitations with a contingency firm, by definition, because they won't get paid unless they make a hire, it's kind of a numbers game, and it's harder for them to justify the same time investment as an advisor. It's hard for them to justify running candidates through kind of full funnel interviews. Now, there are some contingency firms out there who do that. Lack and Daly, for one, out in Connecticut. We've referred a lot of work there. They're very good, and they will actually interview candidates, but most of them just aren't able to do that. On the retained side, if you're doing it the right way, you're spending a lot of time understanding, where a candidate is trying to get to, function, industry, level, title, compensation, you name it. So you want to be a good advisor. And we're committing to the client that when we recommend a candidate, we think, number one, they can do the work technically, functionally. And number two, we think they're going to be a good fit.
Yep.
So that's kind of how we run our interview process.
Yep. And so if you're a candidate, you can probably start to sense pretty quickly based on even the initial engagement with the executive search person. Hey, send me a resume like I did. I'm just trying to move stuff and just, hey, they're in a hurry and don't have a lot of time to invest. Again, I know that we're speaking in generalities and it's probably very unfair to some contingency firms, but typically, as you said, it's a numbers game. Therefore, they need to kind of be fast and efficient. Whereas in retained search, it's slower, more of a deep dive. We're committed to getting the right person in the role, whatever it takes, because that's what we've been retained to do. Is that fair?
Right. That's how it should be. I encourage people just ask right up front. So whether you get an inbound email or a phone call, just ask the recruiter up front, are you a contingent firm or are you retained on the search? It's a perfectly fair question. Nobody should have a problem answering that question.
But what do I do with that information? So I ask them, how should I interpret what they tell me and how should I act accordingly?
Well, it certainly should set up an expectation about how engaged and how involved you might be with that recruiter. So if they say, hey, we're doing this on a contingent basis, they're probably not going to spend a ton of time. So what's really important is that you give them, the most critical stuff they need to know. This is where I live and I can't move, or we're trying to move to this city. This is the industry I'd like to be in. This is the level that would be interesting to me, the title that I'd find compelling. Compensation has gotten dicey as a conversation because I think a majority of states now have outlawed our even asking somebody what they earns. So there's ways around that, but you want to make sure if it's a contingent recruiter, you get that on the table right away. And by the way, you want to say the same things to a retained recruiter, but that may come in pieces.
Yeah. It's funny on the even when we're dealing with clients and we're trying to help them land in their next spot, I will ask, and again, I'm not executive search per se, but helping people just make sure that we're, as I say, shopping in the right neighborhoods. So like, what kind of comp are you looking at? Whether it's base and total comp. I just want to make sure that the things that we help find with you, are appropriate because. And similarly, if a friend's calling me for a referral on something, I'm like, well, help me understand the comp because I just want to make sure I don't send you somebody who's making $250 and you guys are looking to pay $125 for this role.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And it's a fair question to ask a recruiter, right? What's the compensation range for the role? You may get a couple of different types of answers, but they should have an idea. And if they don't, or if they're not willing to share, my suggestion is you just politely say, listen, when you've got a sense for what the compensation is going to be, just get back to me and let's pick this right back up.
Well, that's such a tactful way of saying it, but it sort of establishes too, like the authority I have in my career. Like I should be able to ask this is a very basic question.
It is. No, it is, Bob. And look, you're also respecting the recruiter's time and the client's time. You don't want to go down a path thinking that you might need 250 as a base. You find out it's 190,
Mm-hmm.
and you wasted everybody's time. So the recruiter should be doing that to make sure everything is aligned.
Yes.
But it's a very fair question to ask.
Okay, cool. So one thing that I wanted to talk with you a little bit about, if we could just zoom out for a second, you know, we're in a very interesting talent market these days, right? You know, ostensibly tech has sort of turned the spigot off for a while. They were in a land grab with talent and then kind of went, whoa, slow down, and kind of unwound a lot of what they had done. On the other side, we see, Bureau of Labor statistics that say it's order of magnitude 2 to 1, openings to talent available. I'm just curious what you're seeing, and I do want to be very specific to the niche area that you guys service because it overlaps really, really well with our listeners
Right.
of what you're seeing in the talent market and how that's evolved over the past few months.
Sure. I think most firms would tell you, and most articles you read would suggest that volume so far in 2023 is off versus last year. And 2022 was down a little bit from 2021. There was just a lot of tailwind in a lot of industries with COVID. I mean, a lot of headwinds too, but a lot of tailwinds. But I think 2023 is more in line with 2018 and 2019. So it's not. I don't perceive 2023 as being really down. I think it's in line with the period before we got this unusual COVID spike. There's some sectors that I think are still strong. Healthcare, financial services still seem to be pretty strong. CPG is strong. I mean, during COVID, if you sold a product or a service that was consumed in or around the home, if you weren't doing well, you were really mismanaging your business. And I think we're continuing to see that. Travel, entertainment, I think are still off a little bit. Hospitality still off a little bit as travel's just inching its way back.
Mm-hmm. Although that should generally be a tailwind as people are obviously we've pretty much come out of COVID and it seems like consumer dollars are shifting to services and experiences more than stuff.
Yes.
So we should expect that those continue to do well. When you think about marketers, because at least in my mind, David, you can say that's not right, but I think of you guys as doing, I think you said 40% of the roles you do are marketers, and I see you guys have some very high quality roles. How has, from the client's specifications, desires, requirements for marketers, how's that changing? And has the priorities flipped or switched at all in terms of here's sort of the key things we're looking for compared to maybe 5 years ago?
Sure. The biggest shift, and again, I've been doing this almost 30 years. After Al Gore invented the internet, everything started changing. The biggest debate I will have with a CEO or a CHRO when they call and say, we want a new chief marketing officer, my first question is, what type are you looking for? There's different prototypes. There's kind of the traditional brand marketer. There's more of the direct marketer, direct response marketer, and then the digital and performance marketer. What I've seen, Bob, over the years is just a rapid shift to digital and performance as the definition for what you want in a CMO. Depending on the type of company you are, I'm not sure that's always the right answer. I still believe that the digital is largely about activation. It's tactical. I think it's a level 2 or a level 3 hire. I wouldn't necessarily define my chief marketing officer first and foremost as a performance marketer. Again, depends on the type of business. But if you're selling omni-channel, brick and mortar is still a big part of your business. Consumer brands, I still like the prototypical CPG brand marketer. Those people for the last 10 years have overseen a digital marketing mix. It's not as though, this is going to be a first run for them. Tactically, they may not be the hands-on keyboard type. They may not be spending hours every day in Google Analytics. That's what you want level 2 or level 3. So that's the biggest debate that we have. What type of CMO do you need?
Yeah. And so if you're becoming introduced with a client and they start off with, well, David, I'm a classically trained marketer. You're going good, if I'm hearing you right.
Yeah. Yes.
First, okay.
Yes.
Because sometimes what I hear is, oh, because they think the person asking the question thinks that, oh, I need to hear all the digital stuff. And you're saying, well, actually, you need the strategy piece first. We'll get to the tactical stuff
Right.
along the way.
Yeah. If you're not really skilled in brand positioning, consumer segmentation, really answering the big questions, where to play, how to win, um, digital native isn't going to do you any good. So yeah, I think they're called fundamentals for a reason.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
William
Well,
Procter and James Gamble were selling, candles down in the Ohio River, they were still working off the fundamentals that I think are still just as relevant today.
which is what one thing that I think is so cool about sort of the integrated nature of your practice, right? Because we talked about research, insights, data, and analytics. Well, that's where those insights are found to identify unmet consumer needs. And then how do we go meet those better than the competition? And then the activation piece is just getting in front of them, either with messaging or the ability to actually buy the product.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
With one of the things that we hear a lot about these days with marketing and sales, and again, I'm going CPG for just a second, is retail media networks. Are you hearing that a lot from your clients and what role that's playing in terms of importance of mix?
Again, I think it depends on the type of company. And with our mix, a lot of it is consumer, but we do a lot on the B2B and enterprise side.
Yeah.
And I think as more and more companies have explored alternate channels for marketing and selling products and services, the type of spend and the type of media mix could look very different.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then thinking about sales as a function and CROs, chief customer officers, whatever the role is called at the company, how's that evolved over time and where do you see that going?
Yeah, a couple things. A lot of companies have, particularly on the B2B side, but even on the consumer side, they've been pushing marketing and sales together. There still might be a head of marketing and a head of sales, but this chief commercial officer
Yeah.
position started popping up maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I just see
Mhm.
more and more of that. Again, depending on the business and what they're selling and who they're selling it to, that might make sense. I think it definitely makes sense on the enterprise side. Ultimately, that chief commercial officer is either going to be it's going to be a capital M marketing and a small S, or vice versa, in
Mhm.
terms of the background and experience they bring.
And do you see chief growth officer some?
Sure,
And what does that mean?
I see a lot of titles. We have talked clients out of using some titles because it just may not fully embrace the scope of the work, or it may not resonate
Mhm.
with the type of person that you're looking for. But yeah, chief growth, I've seen that used both on the sales side and on the marketing side.
Got it. So let's double click because one of the things that I really wanted to we talked earlier. I'm going to circle back to the different kinds of firms, but one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is building a relationship with executive search firms kind of before you need them and maybe
Yeah.
before they need you. Could you pick that thread up for a minute?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. If you remember, and you're a Cincinnati guy, back in 2006, 2007, my wife asked me a half dozen times, "Hey, we need to get a whole home generator, right? Just in case." And I said, "Yeah, we'll get to it. I've got other things I'd rather spend $8,000 on." And then, if you remember, in mid-September of 2008, the Hurricane Ike, the remnants kind of roared into the Ohio Valley, and we were out of power for a whole week. And of course, by October 1st, I had our $8,000 Generac whole home generator in place. But the problem was I put it in after I needed it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to your point, if you're looking to build relationships with recruiters when you suddenly find yourself in transition, you're gonna have an extended transition. So you absolutely want to start building that network out right now. And by the way, you want to also be that backup generator to other people.
so so but the double click is how do I build that relationship? I'm going to be very crass for a
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah.
But if a recruiter, particularly contingency, is highly transactional,
Yes.
like I'm not trying to build relationships right now. I'm trying to get paid on filling a role. And oh, by the way, you don't look like anything I'm working on right this minute. So I don't have time.
Right. Right. Well, I think the best, let's just say worst case scenario, you literally don't have any recruiter relationships right now. What I suggest to people, and it's very simple advice, but people who have done it have said it's very effective. First of all, make a list of former bosses and mentors, people who you really respected, you had a good relationship. They've gone on to do great things. Reach out to them. Just send them a simple email. Hey, Bob, listen, I'm looking for a new opportunity. I'm sure you're connected with some really good recruiters. You know my industry, my function. I'm looking for something at this level. Could you suggest a couple, not 20, but a couple who you've worked with, who you really respect? They've listened to you. You trust what they're sharing. I would love it if you could make a personal introduction. Would you do me that favor? People generally want to help out.
Amen.
And if you send that email out to 6, 7 former bosses or mentors, you'll be amazed at how quickly you've got some new relationships. And by the way, they don't need to send your resume to the recruiter contact. They just need to make a very simple introduction. And that kind of helps you bypass the line. It puts you right to the front of the line when you're coming in with that kind of an endorsement.
And so when you're on the receiving end of that, so say, Julie sends you an email and says, hey, I'd like to introduce you to my former colleague, Bob. Bob is X and is looking for Y. What's your reaction to that?
Well, again, generally, I will put that person up to the front of the line. And certainly if it's somebody who we've done a lot of work with in the past and we know them and we trust them, we're gonna create time. I get 50 emails a day from people saying, hey, I'd like to pick your brain for 30 minutes. I wish I had that amount of time. But every day I'll find time for at least 3 or 4 of those. And generally those are people who are moving right to the front of the line because my friend Bob said, hey, you really need to understand and talk to Stephanie. She's a really good talent. I think you'd want to have a relationship there.
Now, the answer to the question I'm getting ready to ask you might be very simple and even common sense, but one of the things that we really try and teach our members is how to add value in a relationship and try and be a net giver than a net taker. What does help look like if Scott makes the introduction to me and we have that first call and I'm looking to add value to this relationship and not just be a net taker? What does that look like from your perspective? What does help look like?
Sure. And I'll address this in another context later, but first of all, engage when it makes sense to engage. Raise your hand when that recruiter really has an opportunity that makes sense for you. When you're, as a recruiter, I'm interested in meeting new talent and we're interested in engaging with new clients. So the 2 most critical things you could do to help a recruiter is refer good talent, not just a friend who needs it, but a friend who's a top player. And if you can steer business towards that recruiter, that is always going to be appreciated.
Yeah. So that's why I kind of caveated my question with this may sound like really common sense, but again, it's about being empathetic and putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Well, what is the nature of the recruiter's business? It's having clients and it's having talent, access to talent. And, we all have networks. We all know who's kind of our A list in our network. And, I would say to you, and then we've had this conversation, David, what are some, very important searches that you're working on right now? And what's some of the talent look like? Because if there's somebody in my network, I'd love to introduce them to you. Everybody wins in that. Everybody wins in that. And it's fairly simple, but you have to be intentional about doing it because that's the nature of relationships. Otherwise they do become transactional and you haven't really added value. You've sort of made a little chip shot, but you haven't really done, a lot to add value to the relationship versus, oh my gosh, I know that I think we're interviewing for executive search firms right now. We've been struggling with this position. I'd like to recommend that we work with you. or hey, based on what you're telling me, like my former boss would be a great fit for that role. Let
Yes.
me get you guys introduced.
Yep. Hey, I'll share one quick story with you. When I was at P&G in 1991, I got a call from a recruiter on the West Coast. His name was Vito Biala. He had a very robust practice, did a lot of work in Silicon Valley. I think he's retired now, but he called and he pitched me on a role. I think it was director of advertising at Sprint. And I asked him a lot of questions to better understand the role and who he's looking for. And after about 10 minutes, he said, well, you sound like you're interested. I said, this would not be for me, but I've got a recommendation for you. And I suggested a guy named Tim Kelly, who was an account executive at DMB&B, who I thought would be great in the role. Long and short of it is Tim ended up in that role and ultimately became CMO at Sprint. And needless to say, Vito called me many times after that for ideas on other searches, and ultimately asked me if I wanted to get into the business. So that can be really, really helpful. Just if it's not for you, that's fine. Understand who it might be for. And if you've got somebody in mind who you feel good about, that recommendation is powerful.
So let's kind of go down that same road. Now, I am engaged with a recruiter, and it's a role I'm actually interested in. Like, how do I work best with you? And maybe do's and don'ts, or kind of best practices and maybe not best practices.
Sure. Like I said, it starts with raising your hand when the role makes sense. We get a lot of people who will raise their hand for everything.
Yeah.
And I hate being the guy that says, look, this just isn't a fit. But if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. So make sure it's something you're generally interested in. And be clear about those factors I mentioned a few minutes ago. Understand the location, title, compensation. Those are the three things that can derail a search in the end.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, on the location front, you would ask kind of what's happening in the market right now. We're seeing more and more senior level hiring as an in-office 5 days a week hire. Doesn't mean that there aren't still quite a bit of hybrid and commuting situations out there, but more and more CEOs are expecting people to be in the office, and it's just a really interesting tug of war to watch. So yeah, when you first engage, make sure that the fundamentals line up. The second thing, Bob, is just show real engagement. I mean, if you're interested, don't be coy, don't be shy. Show some enthusiasm. Make yourself available for interviews. If I email somebody and say, look, we need to do an interview here. I'm available at these times over the next 2 or 3 days. And what I get is I'm available 2 weeks from now. Everybody's busy. That's clearly not a priority. So make yourself available. Research the company. You'd be surprised how many times I'll get on an interview and I'll ask a question that was answered right on their homepage. And I kind of get a blank stare. So understand it's like buying a stock, right? I mean, hopefully you research the stock before you buy it. Ask some really relevant, insightful questions. Don't ask what you think they want to hear. You're a shopper, right? You're looking for an opportunity. And by the way, I remind my clients, in the end, the buyer isn't you. The buyer is the candidate. So you need to operate as a shopper who's on that kind of a mission, and whatever your list of priorities are, right? Ask the questions that you really need to understand to validate your interest. Communication. Be responsive. Keep your communications tight. I wrote a short article on LinkedIn a few weeks ago called 30 Seconds, and I got a lot of really good feedback on it.
Please unpack that one. That was brilliant. I loved it.
Yeah, it's the number one mistake that most people make, not just in interviews, but probably in life, is they just say too much. The average attention span for an adult might be, 10, 15, 20 seconds. So you really need to be concise in your answers. Don't stretch a 30-second answer into 3 minutes. And it's interesting. We all probably talk a little bit too much, and it can feel uncomfortable to give a short answer. But I rarely have had a client say, boy, I really like Bob, but his answers were really short and to the point. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So work on it. Most interviews now are happening on video.
Yeah.
Put a little yellow sticky up next to your camera and just 30 seconds, keep it tight. That is a very common mistake. Be expressive, use your hands, show some energy, don't be over the top, right? There's some people who are a little bit too amped up, but just kind of be yourself, show some personality. We all like people who've got a little bit of energy. So don't be afraid to show it. Anyway, one other thing too, in follow up on an interview.
Yes.
I would recommend within 4 to 6 hours after you interview, whether it's with the recruiter or with head of talent or the hiring manager, send a short email. And when I say short, this is what I'm talking about. Bob, thank you for your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you got what you needed. I remain very interested in this opportunity. I'm ready for whatever comes next. That's it. Don't recap the 10 reasons why you're the right fit. Don't keep selling yourself. Even if there was something that you kind of forgot to talk about in the interview, or you want to kind of take another swing at an answer you gave, that's fine, but don't do that in your follow-up. I mean, keep your follow-up really timely and really tight.
No, I have to ask why, because that's going to go against the very strong urge for somebody to like, oh, I want to re-explain myself. Why is that not your recommendation?
Yeah, because guess what, Bob? We want what we can't have, right? I mean, if I have to get surgery on my knee, do I want the orthopedic surgeon who's available tomorrow or 3 weeks from now, right? So there's a kind of a scarcity mentality here. You want to show interest, but not too much interest. So I think if you come on too strong, it can, in some cases, even sound a little bit desperate. And those people just aren't as interesting or attractive as somebody who is very clear about their interest. They're serious about this. But this is business, right? I'm letting you know where I am. I know you're busy, so I'm going to keep my communication tight.
Yep. And then, gosh, you're making me think about 10 different things at once. But just to make sure I want to make sure we finish on something here, which is, okay, I'm in the process with the company. You vetted me. I've talked with the head of talent. Now I'm spoken with the hiring manager. What is your role in all of this as I continue to go deeper in the process? Do you start to fade to the background a little bit, or are you the shepherd of the whole process?
Yeah, great question. If you're working with, well, whether it's retained or contingency, but particularly with a retained recruiter, you should ask him or her right up front, what should I expect in this conversation with the hiring manager? You're not asking for a playbook. You're not asking for any inside baseball, or you're not looking for answers to the test. Just kind of what's the agenda here? Give me some insights. What are the hot buttons? And we prep candidates. I'll send out an email, or I'll hop on the phone and I'll say, hey, Bob, these are the things that you really need to emphasize. This is a private equity owned company, right? By definition, you're going to have fewer resources. Make sure you emphasize how scrappy you can be. Roll up your sleeves. They need to really understand that. Usually there's a couple of key things that you really need to make clear in that interview. You can get some insight and some prep from your recruiter on that.
Yep. So a couple questions back on the brevity of answer, but this really has to do with sort of shaping your brand in the mind of both the recruiter and ultimately the hiring manager. What is your preferred response structurally, or however you want to describe it, to tell me about yourself?
You're saying
if you're asking a candidate, so Julie, it's great to meet you. Like, I'd just like to hear a little bit about your background. Tell me about yourself, however that question is phrased, but sort of that very wide open question.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would never ask that question.
Okay.
And it's kind of a lazy question. And if I'm debriefing with a candidate after they interview, and I'll ask them, tell me how it went. Well, we kind of wandered a little bit because they started off saying, hey, talk about your background. And what happens is you spend 10 minutes walking them through, well, I grew up in West Virginia, and I went to Ohio State, and then you walk through every job, and that doesn't tell anybody anything.
Yep.
So most of the people who I know are in your group and followers of yours and clients, they're also out there interviewing people. I would not ask that question.
Awesome. Okay, super good to know.
Oh, by the way, hey, Bob, just a quick follow-up.
Please.
Here's a suggestion too. You're going to get asked that question, right? It can be tricky, but my advice is reframe them with that question. So if you ask me, hey, David, tell me about yourself, my response should be, hey, Bob, I'm happy to tell you anything you want to know. Are you interested in a particular company I work for, or are you looking for examples of things I've done that are really relevant to this role? Tell me exactly what you're looking for. Reframe it.
Yep.
And get them focused. Just because they didn't prepare doesn't mean you can't counter that.
That's really, really good advice. A variation of that is, Julie, happy to, one of the ways I found most effective to do this is just a little bit about me personally, how that's informed my career, and then how that's led me to, where we are today. Would that be a helpful structure? Nobody's ever said no to that.
Right.
Right. And then it's like, oh, okay. So the other thing that I would love to hear you talk about for a minute is oftentimes at the end of an interview or after the interview, I'll say, well, David, how do you think that it went? I think it went pretty well. Okay, why? Well, they seem to like me and we kind of clicked on this, that, and the other thing. Did you ask them how they thought it went, and what they particularly liked, and if they had any concerns? Well, no. What's your perspective on asking for direct feedback in an interview?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it really depends on how you sense that interview went. In a lot of cases, it's so hard to find good people when a hiring manager feels like they're now talking with the one. Most are going to be pretty clear and emphatic about that. So they're just going to tell you, Bob, this was really good. I think you'd be a great fit here. And if they start mapping out next steps, then it went well.
Yeah.
It went well. As far as asking for the order or, trying to close them at the end, I think you can talk around that. Certainly things like, hey, Bob, I know we only had 30 minutes, but did you get what you needed? How do you feel about this fit? Was there something we didn't cover that might be helpful if I address? So it's a very constructive question, but you're kind of getting at, what do you think?
Because back to your point, we're both buyers and sellers in these interactions. And I really appreciate the point that you made. Like, hey, you're also a net buyer here because
Right.
you're trying to figure out if this is a good fit. Nobody wants to take a role that they're either not going to be happy at, good at, or some bad combination of both of those. But at the same time, you are selling.
That's
and
right.
As a salesperson, clarity is my friend. So, Bob, what I really liked is you got this experience, that experience, which, as you know, we think is really vital to this. Is there anything, David, that caused you concern or would cause you concern about me being a good fit for this? Well, I wish you had a little bit more DTC experience or like whatever,
Right.
And then I want to hear that as a salesperson because they're thinking it anyway. And if I don't have the opportunity to either reframe it, that is true. At the same time, I think what we said is this is more important than that. Would you agree with that? Yeah, I think that's true. Or there's just been a miscommunication. I actually do have DTC. We just didn't talk about that.
Right.
Let me tell you. And it's like, oh, that's great to know. Now you are the perfect candidate. But for me, to not know, and then candidates walk away. And the way I tell folks is once that door shuts or that Zoom window closes, you're not likely to get a lot of direct feedback because they're just like, we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And you don't know what you could have done better or where it went sideways.
Right. No, that's right. And to your point, if you're in that conversation at the end of the call, and if the hiring manager isolates a perceived gap in experience, and this is a senior level role, another question or comment you could make would be, do you have someone on the team who does that?
Yes.
Right? Because again, one of the common mistakes that a CEO will make, and we try to work this out when we're writing the job description, you need to hire an orchestra leader. You don't need to hire the entire orchestra.
Right.
Right. And it's impractical to try to hire someone who has literally worked in every sub-functional area that makes up this marketing team. It's not practical. So that would be a good response. You're right. I'm not deep in that area, but I imagine you've got somebody on your team, maybe a director level, who handles that. That's the way that my current team is structured.
Yeah. I love it.
Which is a nice way of saying, dude, what you're asking for is just not reasonable.
Okay. So speaking of unreasonable, this is one of my particular bugaboos with recruiting, and I don't mean executive search, but just talent acquisition in general, is when I do these podcasts with senior executives, and I'll often end it with, what are the talent attributes, Susan, that you most value, when you're building a team or looking to promote someone? Pretty routinely, natural curiosity, and I think it's close cousin, an agile learner, resilience, collaborative, but a bunch of soft skills, right? These are attributes, they're talent, personality attributes. Yet job descriptions are like, not only have you been in CPG, but you've been in personal care, not only in personal care, but oral care, not only oral care, but it's got to be mouthwash. If you haven't been in mouthwash for 12 years, we have nothing to talk about.
Right.
And sort of like that, really, like, can you explain to folks why clients are so fixated on some very specific experiences versus some of the things that might be viewed as more soft skills?
Yeah, I think it's because most people are hiring to manage risk, downside risk. They're not hiring to create upside opportunity. So if you're looking for a second baseman, right? Well, I'm only going to talk to people who have ever played second base. My attitude is, yeah, if you played a little second base, that's great. But I also want people who play different sports.
Yes.
Going back to your point around agility, because there's going to be new learning in any new company, even if it's the same kind of business. Somebody who's done different things becomes more of an athlete. So I hear you. It drives me crazy too. No disrespect to the pharmaceutical industry or our pharma clients, but I'll get a call saying, hey, we need a new head of marketing. I'll ask some questions. What do you think you need? Well, somebody who's been in pharma for 25 years. So it's a tough one, Bob, because again, I understand why somebody would want to just kind of do the easy thing, which is somebody who has been there, done that across, the entire checklist, but you're limiting yourself. You're not going to necessarily get fresh eyes or fresh ideas.
So that's such a great point. I kind of want to close out maybe on this side of it, which is from your client's perspective. So one of the great things about the service that you provide is actually counseling your clients on how to recruit. That's your expertise. And to your point, do you really need a second baseman that's only done that for their whole career, or do you need an athlete? And how you can actually become the consultant to the client, not just get me a bunch of resumes and do the vetting and basically be the due diligence department, but really shape how they think about making this next critical hire.
Yes.
How do clients best work with recruiters or get the most value out of, in your case, a retained search relationship?
Yeah, and I think it's just listening to different ways of kind of defining the role and defining who could fit that role. And what I look for are just analogs, right? So if we're doing a search for a financial service company or a healthcare company, the profile that is my go-to is somebody who is an OTC marketer, right? Somebody who worked for a Unilever or Pfizer, J&J, you name it, because they're getting all the traditional blue chip CPG brand fundamentals, but they also understand how to work in a regulated environment that's very complex with lots of different stakeholders. It's a great analog. So if a client hears that, they should be open to that. Well, that's interesting to me, right? And again, some are, some aren't. Ultimately, if I think it's too narrow, or if I think the person they're looking for is absolutely not what they need, we're going to keep talking until we find a middle ground. And it's not that I pretend to know more about their business, but I've just seen this in the market now for 30 years, and I
Yes.
know what works and what can work, and at least be open to some options, right?
Mhm. So let's start to put a bow on this. If you were just sort of speaking to a room full of executives looking to, advance their career, whether they're already in the C-suite or aspire to the C-suite, arbitrary number, what's sort of the top three things that you would want to share with that group?
In terms of pursuing that next opportunity.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, one comment, we didn't talk a lot about resumes, and this is a whole separate topic.
There's a
Uh,
reason we didn't.
yeah, it's I think, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, somebody sent a memo around telling people you don't even have to list the first 10-15 years of
Oh,
your
yeah.
experience, right? Um, and another thing that I see, I was talking with a woman yesterday who was fantastic. She was at a pharma company for 8 years, and it said marketing director, and that's the only title. And I said, there's no way you worked there 8 years as a marketing director. Well, I didn't. I started as an associate, then I was a brand manager, then I was a senior brand manager. I'm like, well, for God's sake, show the titles. I mean, the two things I look for: promotions and tenure, right? So whoever's telling you, don't show all the titles, that's bad counsel. You want to show that progression. And I want to see a full record. So you might not think that the first 10 years are relevant, or let's be honest, some people are concerned about age discrimination and they don't
Yes.
want to show their age. I totally understand that. But look, if you're talking to a company where that matters to them, how old you are, that's not a place you want to work.
Amen.
It really isn't. So we advise all of our candidates, show me the whole record, all the positions. Let's get a real clear picture, because there's a role for you out there. So it kind of starts with that. And then I would go back to some of the things we talked about earlier. Make sure you're targeting the right recruiters who've got experience in your industry or in your function. Leverage your personal network to identify who those recruiters are. And then everything we talked about in terms of how you communicate, how you engage. If you follow that checklist, you're going to be just fine.
Well, I so appreciate your generator story. And, I often will use the analogy of an ATM. Like, if you just got laid off or for whatever reason, it's like, I need to leave, but I haven't been making deposits in my network, of which recruiters are a significant component, then all of a sudden I need to make a withdrawal. It's like, you're going to get a, sorry, dude, you have no funds. Like you haven't been making deposits.
Exactly
So
right.
you can't withdraw any money right now. And it's very, very analogous to jobs and your career. And the idea of staying in touch with former managers who know you, right?
Yes.
Respect you don't know what can happen when, yeah, you reached out to them to get the name of a couple of recruiters they might recommend to you. For all you know, they're thinking about, hey, I haven't even posted this yet, but we're thinking about opening up a new role.
I have
David, you'd
seen
be
that so
perfect for
many
this.
times, Bob. I have seen that so many times. And that, by the way, in my opinion, that's the best way to go get a job. Because the biggest risk when you go to a new company is that relationship with the hiring
Yes.
manager. And it's chemistry. And chemistry is an experiment. So if it's a former boss, mentor, and you know and trust each other and they know what they're getting, that's the best way to go get a new job.
Well, and let's just use that as the perfect contrast to what you said a few minutes ago, which is hiring by its very nature is a risky business, and people are trying to de-risk it.
That's
What's
right.
the number one bridge over the risk canyon? Trust.
Yes.
And who trusts you? People that already know you. They've experienced you, and that's the way to go. I'm just going to repeat what you just said. That's the best way to get a new job, and the best time to go get a new job is when you don't need it.
That's right.
It's because now you're operating from a position of strength, and you have choices, and you're not desperate, and you're not. I mean, it just leads to a whole bunch of negatives. So I think that's a great way to end. Is like, be proactive, own your career. Recruiters are a very important part of that. They're not the only part, but they're a very important part. And yeah, I've learned a ton of stuff today, David. So I appreciate 30 years worth of scar tissue that you had to share with me today. So thank you. If people want to, get engaged with the firm, learn more about you, learn more about some of the roles that you guys may be working on, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. They could hop on our website just to get a sense of kind of who we are, what we do, what we've done. Wiserpartners.com.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to shoot me an email, it's just david@wiserpartners.com.
Awesome. Cool.
And I will do my best to respond, to every email. I do fall behind occasionally, but we try to be as responsive as we can be.
No, this has been phenomenal. Like I said, I've been wanting to do this for quite a while, so I'm glad I finally got my nerve up to ask. So thank you so much for coming on.
Anything for you. I really appreciate what you're doing. It's important work.
Awesome. Well, bless you and good luck with being a new grandpa. That's exciting.
Thank you very much.
Okay. See you soon.
Okay. Take care.
I know